We are very pleased that we have two very special gentlemen joining us this morning. Bernie Schoenberg, who we all know from State Journal Register, and Jim Leach, which we all know from WMAY. We're going to structure the beginning just a bit, and then we'll obviously let these guys talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. But we're going to start with Bernie. There's a new governor in town, Bruce Rauner, sworn in January, and I thought we'd let Bernie talk a little bit about the new governor in town.
Gee, that's an interesting topic in Springfield these days. Good morning, everybody, and as usual, Bob has brought an intimidating group because everybody knows more than me in this room, so good to see everyone. The story of Governor Rauner obviously is a very interesting one. The first time I talked to him a few years ago, it was about the time some ads were running against Aaron Schock that Governor Rauner says he had nothing to do with. Schock's people are saying he did. He said he didn't. And then when he announced for governor on that day, I was able to talk to him, and so he talked in ways that I had never exactly heard a high-level politician in Illinois ever talk before. He mentioned government union bosses as the most powerful and destructive people in the state. Cinda Clickna's in the room, so I should be careful how I say that. But he mentioned her name and others. I called around and got responses from the organizations that he named. And I thought, well, this is so far afield from where Illinois has been Republican or Democrat that this is an interesting guy, but he's saying kind of strong things. And it was before Donald Trump, so I didn't think he had much of a chance to hang around, but things change. So, in looking over the past year, which is what kind of Bob said I would do, I thought I would actually go a little bit farther back and point to a recent story that Brian Mackey did on public radio. He just found a speech that Bruce Rauner, not yet governor, gave at a George W. Bush Institute thing in Chicago, where he talked about, again, how terrible public service unions are as far as, taking from the taxpayers and not giving back enough. He referred to AFSCME as AFSCAMI, and he talked about one possible way to get out of this. One of the other guys on the panel was Jimmy John Leotard, who was very upset with Illinois law, despite the fact that his business has now grown from about 1,000 stores to 2 or 3, and he hasn't gone to Florida yet. But anyway, Bruce Rauner was saying, I think maybe we could have a wedge issue if people are forced to decide between social services that Democrats like and those bureaucrats running government in those government unions. And it's odd because it may just be coincidence, but that's kind of what's been happening in our 5th month without a state budget. But to be fair, Governor Rauner clearly says he wants certain changes, the turnaround agenda that would allow at least now local governments to decide if they will collectively bargain with their own employees. On the other hand, he says he's taken off the table right to work, because after he just a quick recap, as we know, he talked this anti-union stuff in the primary, got 17% of the vote in Sangamon County when Kirk Dillard, with union support with a lot of Democratic crossovers, got 60 in Sangamon County. But Bruce Rauner won the primary. Then he didn't really talk about union stuff much until after the general election was won. He talked about Pat Quinn as a bad manager of state government, had some bad Bill Holland, had done some work finding, like, the program that was distributing money, $50 million for an anti-crime program around Chicago, all of this bad management stuff. So, mismanagement by Pat Quinn was really the theme of the election. Then he won, and on election night he talked about Illinois being a competitive and compassionate state. But then when he was inaugurated, we heard government union bosses again pop up as a theme. And then he went to like 63 locations, if the Tribune story was correct in its counting, asking local governments to pass things saying that we want right-to-work zones in Illinois. He has now backed off that, which he says is compromise. But he has also proposed other bills. including a pension one that would not allow government employees to bargain on wages, pensions, work schedules, or tenure, but everything else they could collectively bargain on. So it's just a very odd thing. What I have said for a long time, what it appears is he talked a lot about Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, as a role model, and Scott Walker in Wisconsin. If you recall, Scott Walker was able to erode union rights in Wisconsin and not make it mandatory to pay fair share, if you want to call it that, fees, which, or as the governor would say, unfair share, if you don't want to join. But Scott Walker got that done because he had a Republican legislature. Illinois still has overwhelmingly Democratic legislature, but Governor Rauner clearly thinks that through various kinds of pressure, he can get similar changes in Illinois. When people like Mike Madigan or John Cullerton say that goes against our core values, which I think to a lot of Democrats it's kind of like a religion because they've come up with this and been there all of these years. You know, Governor Rauner says, well, they've made exceptions. Look at some of the things they've done in Chicago. They've allowed the school day to be lengthened. That wasn't collectively bargained. The legislature did that. On the other hand, those changes that our legislature has allowed unions to, or governments to make outside the collective bargaining arena have been generally with union agreement. So we are at a standoff. The budget hole grows bigger every day, and I'm not exactly sure where this comes down to. The fact that outside groups arranged a meeting for November 18th, which had to be rescheduled because of a death in Mike Madigan's family. You know, we now talk about, well, we'll have another meeting December 1st. And it's just the weirdest thing we've ever seen. I will finish now and leave it to Jim, but Monday, many candidates, including at least one in this room, will be filing petitions for the next legislature and Congress and U.S. Senate. Clearly, I don't think any of us who have been following this for way too many years have ever seen filing in the late part of the year for the next spring election without having a state budget in place. So we'll go from there.
Thank you. Jim? We swore in Jim Langfelter as the new mayor of Springfield in May, and I wondered if you could discuss the city a little bit.
Well, compared to the recap of state, this is going to be fairly dull, and that's actually a good thing. We did start the year, obviously, in the midst of a five-way primary for mayor, including the incumbent at the time, Mike Houston. And shortly before primary day, we revisited the issue of the Shredgate story. The mayor actually thought that, and I believe I see him actually in the back of the room, Mayor, thought that that might have been an intentional bit of timing there. I would note that a few weeks later, Vince Demetri was gone from Channel 20. Coincidence, karma, who knows? But we did go through that primary process and came out with two candidates, Paul Palazzolo and Jim Langfelder. And again, a pretty stark contrast to what was happening just a few blocks down at the Capitol, in that we had a campaign that was not full of heated rhetoric and finger pointing and accusations of corruption and so on. It was actually driven by issues and thoughtful approaches to, I think, very much the benefit of local voters, and two competent, qualified politicians in the running for it. And when it all came together, then Jim Langfelder followed in his father's footsteps to become the mayor of Springfield. Also a big change over in the city council. I think that was also pretty important, in that we had about half the city council change out in that election. Since then, it really has been pretty quiet. The mayor putting together his team, the aldermen not engaged in a lot of backbiting and infighting with each other. We've addressed City Water, Light, and Power and some of their financial problems, and that was a process that was already starting, but now has been seen through with a refinancing of the utilities bonds and a rate restructuring program that's been put in place. Now we're getting ready to start a budget, and the city may actually have a budget as compared to the state, so that's always welcome too. And then just some of the other issues that come up from time to time, whether it's drones or lawn mowing or residency, or as I like to refer to it, a gift from the talk radio gods. But really things are just kind of rolling along there, other than the fact that, as with everything everything else, a lot is still riding on what happens at the state, because that state budget, or the lack thereof, has ripple effects that go all the way through the community, for the county, for the city, for private business, for nonprofit organizations. So really, that's, I think, the overriding issue for everyone, top to bottom.
Thank you very much. I'm out of questions, so what I would like is you guys to talk about 2015 as you wish, and at the very end, before we go into questions, I would like a few minutes on the presidential race. So if you'd stay away from that right now, and then we'll kind of touch it.
Okay.
Because it has a little interest also.
All right. Well, I guess just talk.
Is that what you were going to talk about?
I'm at your service, Bob. I would just like to say that clearly, with legislative elections coming up, obviously the Raymond Poe thing going on today, Kent Gray's in the room, and I think he'll be interviewing today for that job. And if anybody is a betting person, just be careful where you put your money down today. But it's very interesting. There is word that the governor might have been exerting or will be exerting some influence. I was kind of surprised a couple days ago when the press secretary, Catherine Kelly, said, the governor is closely monitoring the race. We will be making an endorsement. This, of course, is the governor who talks a lot about local control of things like collective bargaining, but apparently local control may not apply to local choice of state representative, but we'll find out later in the day. I will say my friend Natasha Korecki of Politico yesterday did an item in her new Politico play sheet or playbook, whatever they call it. They have a daily thing that I'll be writing about soon just because it's a good resource for people, and said that Sarah Wojcicki-Jimenez is the likely person. Now, when I talked to Rosemarie Long yesterday, she didn't know that or say that, and she is one of the 3 votes today of the Sangamon County people who will pick the replacement for Raymond Poe, so we'll see where that goes. And obviously, Gray Knoll has kind of been the person who ran against Sam McCann in 2012 for state senate, and he's an assistant state's attorney, and he has a good Springfield name, and we'll see what happens there, because it could also be him. There's Bryce Benton on the convention center board, and of course Kent Gray are among the other people who have put in petitions for that, or applications, and Rose told me that in total 11 people applied, and I think many of them will be talked to today before a decision is reached, and we'll see where that decision goes. I will also just quickly say U.S. Senate race is interesting. Candidates have not been trekking to Springfield as they used to. I have no idea if that's because there are fewer reporters in the State House now, but used to be by this time candidates for U.S. Senate might pass through Springfield more often. I don't know what it means. Friday, I went to or maybe I guess it was not Friday, it was this week, Wednesday, at Saputo's. There was a Sangamon County Republican Network meeting, and a guy named James Martyr of Oswego was there. You probably haven't heard of him yet, but he's running against Mark Kirk as a more conservative Republican from Oswego, and has raised something under $20,000. The realists in the room know that that's a real long shot, but it's interesting that Mark Kirk, may be challenged. Mr. Martyr, who's a businessman, said that he has already got enough petition signatures and is getting some extras. He had more than 5,000. You need 5,000. As people also in this room know, if you don't have 2 or 3 times the amount, they will find your people and knock you off the ballot. It's a tough game. On the Democratic side, Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman from suburbs of Chicago, is Dick Durbin's choice and Democratic Senatorial Committee's choice, but Andrea Zopp, who headed the Urban League in Chicago and also has a good resume, I think it's Harvard Law, and Napoleon Harris, a state senator who played in the NFL, which remains a popular sport despite concussions, are running for the Democratic nomination so far. So it's going to be an interesting time. And just in general, Bruce Rauner, well, after Rod Blagojevich, the Illinois legislature finally passed caps on spending on things, but there was a way to bust the caps. So if you spent $250,000 yourself, all bets are off. Bruce Rauner did that, ended up spending, his campaign was like $65 million, and he donated something like $27 million himself. And right at the end of the time the cap would be reimposed. So at the end of 2014, like on December 30th or 31st, he donated, I think it was $20 million to his own campaign fund. So that money, which has clearly been set aside to try to elect friends in the legislature, is all there. So there's a whole lot more money than ever before. I see Kent Redfield in the audience, and he's the expert on campaign finance, would know this. So the Democrats and the unions, I'm sure, will be scrambling to try to gain a lot of money, and it will really depend. Money's always important, but it's not the only thing, and we'll see where the races of 2016 go.
And it should be noted, by the way, that money is coming into both sides here, because not only will there be a lot of money available for Republican candidates, but there's also been a group that is nominally a Democratic group but has some affinity toward the governor. They're pretty well funded also, and may be looking to stage primary campaigns in a number of districts around the state. So this filing period is going to be really interesting to see who jumps in, who challenges sitting incumbents, and who's affiliated with whom, who's funded by whom, and we in the media have to kind of dig down in the weeds to sort of sort that all out. But it really is a shaking up of the old order of things. And Bernie referenced Professor Redfield, and I'm sure he would agree that in a lot of cases we don't have competitive races. Incumbents are well financed. People are hesitant to get in. I think you're going to see a lot more challenges this year than we're used to, and that really does have the potential to shake up a lot of things, to coin a phrase.
And that deadline is, filing is Monday through Monday, correct?
Monday through Monday, so I think it's the 30th is the last day at 5 o'clock, and we all used to have to rush over there to basically to see what Sam Canman was going to file for at the last minute. But I'm sorry, Sam, everybody has a right to run, and he served. So, but now things are online, which it makes it a little easier. But I think might still have to be there at 5 o'clock on Friday to see who gets in right under the wire, because there's always a surprise or two or three, and this year there may be more than that.
Very good. Very good. How about biggest events this last year in the city?
There was an inauguration.
There you go.
That was pretty cool.
There was a big rally a couple of weeks back, but you wanted to save that for later. But that drew a few people down to the convention center.
You know anybody involved with that? No. We had a state fair, oddly with no budget, and some people got paid, and some vendors I think are still waiting to get paid. Kind of the undercurrent, general regular life has kind of gone on in the state of Illinois with no budget, partly because, oddly, judges have said all state employees should get paid.
And the schools are still open.
And the schools are still open because Governor Rauner signed the K through 12 bill. If this impasse continues to go on, it will be perhaps more evident after the first of the year if it's not resolved by then, because I was talking to some people just before we started talking. There's still no current year money starting last July for colleges and community colleges and universities, and those without the giant endowments might have to either cut back. Some have cut back some things already and laid off some people or threatened to. But if they close campuses or classes, more kind of middle America in Illinois will be affected, and then maybe more pressure will come to bear on getting a resolution to the budget situation. I will say that, always in the past when there was no state budget for like 17 days, it was always pressure points, and people use those words a lot. Pressure points were always there to make it happen. Pressure points were usually, when the next state payroll was due and state employees wouldn't get paid, that's the end. Well, the governor and the attorney, at a combination of people, but the governor wanted state employees paid and got judges to agree. So the court system said, yes, continue to pay state employees even without a budget. That was the major source of the reason that this impasse is still going on. And, the collateral damage builds in ways that many of us don't see, the child care, which I guess the governor has moved back now on some of the very steep cuts made in that. And of course, so a lot of people have been affected in that way. And elder care also, he cut severely and then restored some of it. Obviously in Springfield, and what a lot of people in this room are familiar with, the State Museum closure, which was supposed to save a whole lot of money, but then only the top people left because the union people are still working, but the doors are closed, and the American Museum Association or whatever it is, certification, or I know accreditation, may be on the line because you have to be an open facility, open to the public, to maintain that over a long period of time. That's one of those collateral things that we don't know if the governor will go back on, but it certainly has made the budget impasse noticeable around here.
And a pressure point the other direction, why this filing period that starts Monday is so important, is that once lawmakers see who they're running against, either in the primary or the general election, that may help loosen some of them up a little bit. If they feel like they're in safe districts, they're not facing a big challenge, that may make them more able to take some of the votes that so far people haven't been willing or able to take up until this point. But that, again, a lot depends on who actually jumps into the race next week. And if you find a lot of lawmakers with challenges in the primary or credible challengers in the general election, that could, again, make it tougher for some of them to take the very difficult votes that are coming. There's no doubt about that we're facing some very difficult votes to ultimately resolve this. And the hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, so climbing out of it's going to take a lot more work. But politicians being what they are, they're not going to be inclined or eager to take votes if it means they're going to get hammered really hard on it in an election year.
Some comments about a bipartisan group working a little bit behind the scenes, but then it kind of got blown out. Any feedback on that you're aware of?
I know that some of a page full of their points on things they wanted, including some tax increases and some cuts, came out within the last week or two, and that was somewhat behind the scenes. The word is, and I cannot claim to have great sources in the governor's office, but the word is the governor just doesn't like leaks on things. So when word of his meetings leaks, he seems to be upset about it, and word of this other negotiation seems not to have become a key. There is speculation that some of these points may end up in the final package, but people have, we're not there yet because we don't know when the final agreement's going to be reached.
Let's turn to the presidential race as it is. Either one of you can start in. We did have an event in Springfield.
He loves to talk about this on the radio every day, so
and
go
there
for
are
it.
lots of other things going on.
I don't know. Show of hands. Other than Kent, who saw Donald Trump coming? Did anybody picture this at all? Obviously the big story this year is the rise of the outsider. We've seen it in Illinois. We're seeing it at the national level there, and everybody will have their own opinion on this as to whether an outsider can really come in, manage the wheels and gears of government effectively. But that's what a lot of people, I think, are looking at. They feel like whoever has their hand on the tiller right now isn't doing a very good job of steering, and they think, can we really do any worse with somebody coming in completely from the outside? And it's an open question as to whether, in fact, we could do worse. But that seems to be the phenomenon right now, is that people are really entranced by this idea that somebody who isn't part of the system, who isn't tied into the system, who hasn't already been co-opted by the system, they're the ones who can really come in and change the system. Again, I think we've seen some mixed results here. There's no question that Governor Bruce Rauner has shaken a lot of things up and forced people to get out of their comfort zone a little bit. On the other hand, we're close to our 6th month without a budget, so when you talk about the actual nuts and bolts work of government, then you do have the question risen as to whether an outsider can really come in and do that against a whole lot of experienced hands, people who do understand how the machinery works. They don't necessarily use it the way it should be used, but they certainly know how it does work.
Yeah, I'd like to congratulate Sangamon County Republicans on raising a lot of money with the appearance a few years ago in 2014 of Dr. Ben Carson. I think you made him what he is today, and gave him hope, and we'll see where that goes. It's been interesting, but it is part of a series of amazingly lucrative Lincoln Day events for the Republicans in Sangamon County. So no matter what else is going on, the Republican Party in this town seems to be strong and have it together, and we'll see how things go down the line. And if, for example, there's a fight over Raymond Poe's seat in the coming election, which is already promised, so we'll see how that goes. I think I don't cover the presidential candidacy, or race day to day. I am a TV, radio, and newspaper watcher like everybody else. I am among those who is rather surprised that while political correctness is something that is easy to attack, when people are as not politically correct as Donald Trump has sometimes been, every other week he says something that you think will knock him down, but with the help of Kent Gray and others, he has maintained his popularity. So there you go. I mean, this morning I was watching, and I guess he said yesterday that Muslim people should register with the government. Somebody asked him if that was similar to Jews having to register in Germany before under Hitler, and he basically said, "What do you think?" and walked away. So we're getting into some rather dangerous territory, but so far, the anger in America, at least in the primary battle, seems to be keeping him at the top of the polls, and it's a very weird year. Oh, by the way, the other interesting thing I think about Illinois is, I think it's Illinois Republican hierarchy generally has been kind of moderate. And it's funny because a lot of the big names in Illinois are with Jeb Bush. And, Ray LaHood was in town the other day and gave a wonderful talk. Thank you, Mike Lawrence, who's in the audience, for, getting him to town, and had something at the Presidential Library. He is for Jeb Bush and thinks, as things go up and down, Jeb's got a lot of money and things should work out. But boy, those poll numbers are tough, and we'll see where Illinois ends up. Because as you know, the main vote in Illinois in the March primary on the presidential side is not necessarily for the top name, even though I guess on the Republican side, the 15 uncommitted delegates will go to whoever wins that beauty contest. But it's really about delegates. So we'll see who gets those delegates this year.
I am going to go out on a limb, though, right now and say that Hillary Clinton is going to win Illinois. If you'd like to write that down right now. You can...
Well, it's because she's from Park Ridge.
No.
Before we open it up, Illinois has really not been much of a player. I'm sorry. Illinois has not been much of a player in the presidential sweepstakes, and may not be again, to be very honest with you. But typically, they have totally avoided this state for the most part, and so forth. But the timetable, the Iowa caucuses early February, the New Hampshire primary later in February, kind of a Super Tuesday thing, I think, on March 1st, which 10, 12, 15 states, I can't remember exactly, and then Illinois on the 15th. So on the one hand, it might be all over by the time it gets to Illinois, which is, I think, typically been the situation, although one would assume it may not be. And so we want to talk a little bit, kind of touch that.
Only that, and I've talked to some of the professorial types about this, it could still be up in the air. I mean, you have, is it going to be Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or, Dr. Carson or Mr. Trump on the Republican side? If it ebbs and flows, it may still be ebbing and flowing by April 15th, and Illinois could play into it. I would remind people that, I think candidates are missing the boat by not advertising with newspapers, but it's really the TV stations. It's really the TV stations that are going to benefit if it's still up in the air. They just soak the airwaves, fill the airwaves with commercials, and I guess it's good we don't have to see those yet, but we might if things are still in flux in the spring.
Well, and then we could see a lot of candidates in next spring, potentially.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, really,
sure.
But it's all right, yeah.
No, and I agree with that. On the Republican side, certainly, probably more geared toward the Chicago area because they can fundraise and do all of that at the same time. But yeah, I think there's a very real possibility if we still have a 5-6 person race that Illinois is going to be very much in play and very important for them in that process. Now, after the nomination's decided, we probably go back into the background again because they're going to assume that it's going to wind up being Hillary Clinton's electoral votes here, assuming she's the Democratic nominee. But then again, who knows? Again, we're rewriting the book on a lot of things here in Illinois this year, and depending again upon who's on the ballot in some of these down ballot races, does that make Illinois more competitive for the GOP? The conventional wisdom is in a presidential year, it favors the Democrats. But again, nothing's following the rule book anymore here or nationally.
Very good. Let's open up questions, if that's okay. You don't get a chance to do that very often to these two gentlemen. They generally ask the questions. So I can't see real well, but Bill?
The big meeting that's supposed to be coming up between the leadership of the House and Senate and the governor and so on. Most people don't believe that, or at least I think, I'm asking you really, that much is going to come out of that. But I wonder, is there anything buoyed about the fact that Madigan couldn't make it and all of a sudden now the meeting is, I don't know when it is, but can you talk about it?
Okay, the question was, is the big meeting coming up between the governor and the legislative leaders, which was requested by various do-gooder groups, one might say. Is anything going to come out of that, and is legitimate that Speaker Madigan couldn't make it? I'm not going to question that there was a death in the family of Speaker Madigan, so that was A. He did name, interestingly, when he said that, John Bradley, a state representative from Southern Illinois, Marion, I believe, to stand in for him, but the governor didn't take that opportunity and said instead, let's have this meeting with Mr. Madigan here and delay it for another couple weeks to December 1st. The question that Bill Logan asked is, is anything going to come out of that meeting? It's funny. The different people are asking that it be open. I guess these do-gooder groups that asked for this, like the, what is it, Coalition for Political Reform? Is it coalition? No. Committee? Yeah. Campaign for Political Reform. Thank you, Mike. They want it to be all public. The governor set out an agenda saying that we should have an hour of basically speeches on different topics from the leaders and then go into private session. Those groups want it to be open. Some business groups say do it in private. The governor has basically made fun of having a meeting in public. Basically, you don't get anything accomplished that way, so why have it? But we'll do it anyway. Something to that effect, and I think in Bloomington recently. So I'm not hopeful that this will be the greatest forum to accomplish things. People might be able to state their cases in some public way if there is a public aspect to this, which I assume there will be given the show and the attention. At least part of it will probably be public. I don't think anybody thinks right now that it will be the day a decision is reached or a great agreement is reached. The governor has talked a lot about it's probably going to be into the new year, and why doubt him at this point?
Historically, budgets get hammered out behind closed doors, and people may not like that. They like it to be a more transparent, visible process, but the end result is generally we have budgets in that manner. So I tend to agree. From a media standpoint, we'd love to have the whole thing open and be able to record it all and watch them yell at each other and do all sorts of things. It would make great drama, but it's not necessarily the path to actually accomplish something. So presumably, yeah, the real nuts and bolts are going to happen behind closed doors, and a lot of times they happen not so much with the four leaders, but with others below them who really dive down into the weeds of all of it, come up with things they take back to the leaders, who then go back and negotiate it with the governor. So yeah, I think Bernie's right. I don't think anybody's assuming that December 1st they're going to walk out and say, hey, we've got a deal. I think most people think that having them all in the room face to face is better than not, which has been the situation for months now. So it's a step forward, but how much of a step and whether it leads to a final destination anytime soon is still anybody's guess.
Good. Carol?
Bernie, you were there Wednesday, and I asked the comptroller a question regarding wishful thinking, and let's say that we do have a budget address or a budget reached, and I'll go ahead and stretch it out to before the governor takes his next budget message to the legislature, so that gives a little more time. How long do you think, and Jim, please jump in on this too from the local perspective, how long do you think it will take the state of Illinois to recover from this mess? Now, as you said, approaching 6 months, and On Wednesday, I said the state library is the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps it's just the most visible tip of the iceberg, but you have the daycare situation, people who are leaving jobs because they don't have daycare. So what's that doing to the unemployment rolls? And I don't want to make this too complicated, so I'll stop right here and let you jump in.
Well, and your point's well taken in as much as the hole keeps getting deeper every day. So I guess it depends on how you define recovery. We have to first actually find enough resources to get through this fiscal year, and we, that alone is going to be difficult. Then you've got to plan for the future. We still got a pension issue that we have not resolved yet, and that's tens of millions of dollars in unfunded liability. So I guess step one is defining what you mean by recover. Right now, we just got to get the patient off of life support and out of ICU before we can even start to think about getting them out of bed and walking down the hallway. But I don't think there's any question. The longer this goes, the tougher it gets, the more painful the cuts, the more intensive the revenue solution, because each day the problem just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Obviously, one of the big problems is that the temporary income tax, which was in fact temporary, dropped from 5% for individuals to 3.75 in January. So you blow, I guess it's a couple or $4 billion hole in the budget per year. And yet the state, in the money that it's spending, is spending at last year's levels, or with education even a little more. So as Jim said, the hole does get deeper. So if you're going to assume or agree to some sort of revenue tax package, it's going to have to be bigger than the one we had, probably, to fill the gap now, unless you do some rather severe cuts in things. And we have seen that, as in all of, last decades, that those of us who've been watching, anytime you want to cut anything, there's a big problem. As far as permanent damage, I did an article a while ago in which I talked to Professor Redfield and David Yepsen from the Paul Simon Institute, talking about, the effect that the governor is having on the party, et cetera, et cetera. My question was, will he be another Dan Walker and make things so bad with his fighting the legislature for 4 years that the other party will, be governor, have the governorship for the next 26? Nobody agreed to that yet. But one thing that David Yepsen said was, why would students pick Illinois right now to come here to college when they see we have no budget in this disruption? Why would a business come to Illinois? I also, did the recent interview with Jim Edgar, who I don't think endeared himself to the Rauner folks by saying that the governor should quit holding the budget hostage to these non-budget issues, which sounds a lot like what Mike Madigan says, but like the union stuff that looks very difficult to pass. And what Governor Edgar said was that a lot of CEOs, when they look to locate or a business or a factory or their headquarters, they want stability. They want to know what's coming. And right now in Illinois, with the governor pushing an agenda that he wants to force the Democrats into, that kind of stability isn't there because nobody knows what's going to happen. So I think that kind of damage may last some as well.
Questions? Yes.
If people want to leave Illinois because of the current situation, what would you say to them besides sayonara?
If people want to leave Illinois because of the current situation, what do you say to them? Choose a warmer climate, I guess, would be step one. No, I mean, I'm not sure at this point, in all honesty, because the picture does look pretty bleak. Now, do I think Illinois is going to go out of business and close up shop and turn out the lights? Obviously not. But we're in for a few pretty rough years ahead, I think. And Bernie makes some really good points in terms of what it's doing to colleges and universities, in terms of what it's doing to social services in the state and having to recover out of that. And I think it is true that the cure for this is going to feel almost as bad as the illness for a while in terms of what we're going to have to get out of the hole that's been dug, other than, we still have all the natural attributes that Illinois has always had in terms of transportation, in terms of logistics, our prime location here in the Midwest. We are a hub for a lot of different things. We have a solid and numerous workforce. We have a lot of things that are always going to be to Illinois' advantage that even the worst budget crisis can't really kill. So those things are all still going for us, and we will still have that to work our way out of the situation. But don't don't think it's going to be fast or pretty, because it won't be.
Yeah, I have always lived in Illinois and have been doing this kind of job long enough that I'm always upset when I hear of a town I haven't heard the name of before. But as we know, we have more units of government than any other state, so I guess that'll happen. I think Illinois will survive and hopefully thrive. You know, the unemployment rate is down. I think the paper today said 4.9 or 5.4. 5.4. Maybe I'm mixing the city itself. You know, which is half of what it was a few years ago. Obviously, you know, there's been wage stagnation and things like that. The state budget situation is not good. But I like shoveling snow, and I think the state will survive. You know, if people want to leave, they want to leave. No place is perfect, and we will get through this too.
And if you like shoveling snow, we should talk.
That's right.
Other questions? Yes, right here.
I'd just like to ask about you political reporters and what your access to this governor is like compared to other governors, because this one's about transparency. And so if you could just speak to that.
I'll let you feel that first.
The question was, as political reporters, this governor talked about transparency. How's access to him? I'd say pretty lousy. His schedule comes out each day. Sometimes they'll have 3 or 4 events, and it will say no additional media availability after 2, 3, or 4 of those events. Well, never more. There's never more than 1 availability per day. There's often not an availability in several days. There's often weeks in Springfield without one. And when he does have an availability, he'll talk about what he wants to talk about for about 15 minutes, take a few questions, and leave. Whenever his press secretary or the person with him says, "One more question," they mean it. One more question, and he walks away. Will not answer whatever legitimate follow-up you have. I noticed, let's see, Joe Madden, the new great manager of the Cubs in Chicago, when he analyzed the game for reporters, he talked for like 45 minutes answering questions. We have a, you know, $38 billion budget, and our governor gives us 10 once in a while. It's just odd. It's not a particularly open thing. I know I think I shocked one of the reporters from Chicago who doesn't come down here much when at the state fair ribbon cutting this year, the last governor who decided not to take questions was Governor Blagojevich, who ended up holding up his young daughter at the time and created a bit of a thing.
And
this governor, you know, they said we had the ribbon cutting at the state fair, no additional media availability, and so we're in the middle of like the second month at that time of, you know, no state budget. I said, "Are you seriously not going to take questions today? When you're opening this party, the state fair, and we don't have a state budget?" And he goes, "CK," which he's asking his press secretary, "Am I taking questions?" She says, "No, nope, that's it, I'm not." So if you think that's transparent, that's not what he promised.
And it goes even beyond that, because obviously we don't talk to the governor, even in the best of situations, we don't talk to the governor every day, but we would talk to spokespeople or agency directors and things, and sometimes we can't even get that kind of access. Particularly rough for the electronic media, because we prefer to talk to people on tape or on camera. They prefer to answer questions by email, if at all, so it does get very frustrating. Some agencies are very good, some are not, and some staffers and decision makers and things are completely off limits to us, and it is frustrating from a media perspective.
Questions? Tommy?
Leaving aside policy just for a minute, it seems like the governor has generated quite a bit of goodwill just by being highly visible around Springfield. I wonder if either one of you guys would like to comment.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. He goes out to football and basketball games and to barbecues and goes to hang out at Obed and Isaac's and throw back a beer with people, even though his beer of choice is apparently Stag, which to me raises a lot of questions. But no, we hear that all the time from people who appreciate the fact that he's visible in the community, that he does in fact live here and gets out and meets people and shakes hands and takes part in a lot of different events, and that's where again the no additional media availability. A lot of times those things don't get put on a schedule at all. We're not told, hey, the governor's going to be here, come out and get a picture of him. He just goes, and he's not looking for the publicity splash on it. And I think that's very much to his credit, and really does, I agree completely, build up a lot of goodwill.
Yeah, and the question was, is he building up goodwill by going out and about in Springfield? I would definitely agree with that. we have seen, oh, by the way, they don't necessarily seek publicity, but they'll tweet the picture of the governor, meeting folks, et cetera, so it's out there. I will say that for someone who never ran for office before, you sometimes see the kind of category of the rich folks who are trying to do this and inject themselves and then, are kind of stuffy in their suits and don't necessarily come off well in a crowd. Bruce Rauner, he hunts, he rides the motorcycle, he likes wearing the motorcycle gear. Carhartt became part of the campaign. And that all worked very well for him, continues to. I agree that him being around Springfield, for all of the weirdness that people see and what's going on with state government and the budget, people like seeing the governor. When he goes to these events, people line up, I am told. I haven't run into him too often, but everybody wants a selfie because that is the society in which we live right now. And he's the governor, and people respect that, and that's been good for Springfield in that way.
Questions? Right here.
I was wondering, you made comments about the governor's position in the negotiations, but you made no comments with regard to the legislative leaders and their position with regard, or lack thereof, negotiations.
Well, Bernie touched on that a little bit about, again, that sort of almost religion that Democrats are not going to turn their backs on organized labor. And what this is really kind of boiled down to is a fight over will the legislature cave in on things like letting local governments do away with prevailing wage laws or to limit collective bargaining. And that's just anathema to the Democratic majority. And what they've said is, we need to make this about the budget. Those things are non-budgetary issues. The governor's argument is it's absolutely a budgetary issue because those laws are increasing costs for local governments, and that's hurting them, and that's all part of the problematic business climate in the state. But the Democrats have said, no, we just want to deal with the state budget issues, with spending, with taxes, and leave that for another time. The governor has said, the state budget crisis gives him leverage to do the things that he wants to do. That's one of the things that he wants to do, along with term limits, which, again, incumbent politicians don't like. The redistricting, again, that is a threat to the power structure right now. So the leadership in the majority says let's do those separately. That's not a budget issue. Let's deal with the budget. The governor says they're all tied together because they're all part of the business climate in the state. Yeah, and that question was, what about the Democrats' side of these negotiations? I would say that the people that I talked to, some of them in this room, have repeatedly said that they believe that the Democrats would be able to compromise on some things. We know that President Cullerton has put forth some compromise positions on workers' compensation, for example. They've discussed those things. Unemployment insurance, we saw there was recently a compromise that involved labor on various rules that would be better for business. I agree the term limits thing probably won't happen. On the other hand, the governor, who says that he doesn't pay any attention to polls, keeps saying term limits are very popular, so we should do them. And they wouldn't, get Mike Madigan out, as my colleague Charlie Wheeler says, till like he's 85, because it wouldn't take effect for many, many years. On the other, so I think that there are some economic issues where you can chip away at. And most people who watch this process over the years say, for the governor, for example, chip away at these things, see what you can get. I do believe there will be programmatic cuts. I do believe possibly some changes in workers' compensation if you can make a good case that, causation is the big issue. And Democrats have been protective of workers' rights, not to have to go to court to sue their employer, but employers want to say that if you're not injured on the job or can't show that 50% of it happened on the job, you shouldn't be going to the workers' compensation system to get your medical benefits or compensation. So there may be compromise there in those things, but as far as taking away the right to collectively bargain, you're going to have a tougher time, and they are trying to stand pat on that and see where things go. Now, you see various polls come out, and I think
dependent, Americans for Prosperity did a poll the other day. Of course, that's funded by the Koch brothers at the beginning, and basically said that people are blaming the legislature more than the governor. I don't know where this is going to come out. Clearly, things like that add to the governor's resolve. I think the Tribune editorial board, which has been 100% behind him on almost everything on the turnaround agenda, including term limits and remap reform, adds to the governor's resolve. But I think the Democrats, are counting on a strong union push to keep them from caving on the changes that they don't want to make. It's interesting. I remember Dick Durbin before the election, when Pat Quinn was running against Bruce Rauner, and obviously he was a damaged candidate from his tenure and the various controversies. But Dick Durbin was saying they've woken the sleeping giant of the unions, and we're not going to let Bruce Rauner win. Well, obviously he was wrong there. But when you talk to Mike Kerrigan, the president of the AFL-CIO, they say the same kind of things now. Bruce Rauner, we really know the sleeping giant is awakened now for the next election. We'll see. I think that the unions were mad at Pat Quinn, but I think they're madder at what Bruce Rauner has done. So we'll see how those forces align, because obviously union strength in Illinois is down from what it used to be, but it's still a significant force, and particularly in certain regions.
That poll that Bernie referenced, by the way, was interesting for one other thing, in that about 2/3 of the people surveyed said that we should fix the budget by just cutting state spending as opposed to raising taxes, or even a combination of the two. So part of what you're also seeing, I think, in the legislature as well, is that they've got constituents that they've got to be thinking about, voters they've got to be thinking about, who think we can resolve this by cutting. I mean, I'm not in the midst of budget negotiations, but just from the outside looking in, I think that's unrealistic. And I think people have to start coming to grips with the fact that the eventual solution is going to be cutting spending and raising taxes. And until they recognize that, lawmakers are going to be reluctant to do what has to be done, and this situation just keeps rolling on. But we're going to have to pretty much all at some point face the fact, and because even the governor says, yeah, we're going to have new revenue. He wants other things in exchange for it, but I don't think anybody's anymore saying we're going to do this by cutting alone.
Questions? Yeah, straight back here. Yeah, Kent.
When I came here in '75, Springfield was a company town that had a huge presence in state government. In fact, it was state government in terms of kind of what was going on. And that's been significantly diminished since that time. And it used to be when you get a Republican governor back in, then that's really good for Springfield. That, for all kinds of reasons, doesn't seem to be the case this time. Where Raymond Poe is gone now as Rich Bauer. So Springfield's representation is the people going to represent Springfield are all relatively new. So does the fact that our presence in state government as a city is that important? And is that, you see any reason to believe that we're going to have, going to be able to have a bigger presence than, or reestablish the presence we used to have in terms of the interest of, the city as a citizen of Springfield?
As a lifelong Springfield resident, I'm going to probably sound like I'm practicing heresy here. I don't think it's unreasonable to have a pretty sizable state government presence in Chicago. That's where a bulk of the issues and problems are. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, sure, I think a lot of us would love if the entire seat of state government and all the jobs that went with it were here. That's probably not realistic in this day and age. We talked about the governor's just presence and visibility here, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, he closed our state museum. So, and they've talked about selling the James R. Thompson Center, maybe moving some of those workers down to Springfield, but we'll see. I'm not really holding my breath on seeing a big exodus of workers from the Thompson Center coming down to office buildings here in Springfield. And with everything else that's going on, I don't see that the climate's right now for a massive restructuring or movement of personnel from other places back into Springfield, because there's a cost that's associated with that too. So I guess I wouldn't envision that happening anytime soon myself.
Yeah, there have been clearly some local folks hired onto the state agencies in the governor's office, so there's been a little of that. Route 10, of course, is the big difference from way back when you started, Kent. You can't just fire a bunch of people and hire new or bring them in. The governor has talked a lot about Springfield, bringing things to Springfield. We still have to see if that happens. I did one column that notes that this is the first time in 100 years that there are now no members of the Illinois Commerce Commission from outside the Chicago area, with a new appointment or two that the governor made. So they're paying attention most of the time, or they talk about it, but we have to see results later.
Question, Sheila?
Let me put you guys on this hot seat for once.
Sheila, you would do that? Yeah.
I don't ever have the opportunity, and it's been done to me, so here's my chance. We talk a lot about money in politics and its influence and its effect on our democracy. What about given that, I don't know a percentage, but I would say a majority at least of the money in politics goes to the media. Shouldn't we begin to question, and especially in this, I think like at the national level, when we look at the effect that media is having, I think at least, that's my impression. Shouldn't we begin to question, is that money not equally affecting media and how that affects our democracy as well?
I think it should be noted that the money goes to the media in that amount because it works, and that's an important point for everyone in the room to keep in mind. In terms of editorial judgment, you mean? Is that what?
No, I guess if you look at, I'm beginning to question, when you look at the national news, for instance, TV, and you look at the national presidential campaigns. I think the media is more making news anymore than they are just reporting news. And I think that's been happening a long time. I think if you look at some of the stuff that's happened with the candidates in the last, say, 3 cycles of the presidential campaigns, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, some of those candidates would have never gotten any coverage, would have never, just because of the crazy stuff. It's just crazy. And I'm beginning to wonder if it's not because, the more the media fuels this stuff, the more they stay in, the longer these candidates are in, the media makes money. Lots of money, probably billions of dollars.
Are you familiar with the newspaper industry right now?
I guess I'm not even suggesting it. I don't see that kind of effect as strongly on the local level, and certainly not as much as print. But I think I'm talking about the national sort of entertainment news
There's no question
industry that we have now.
The media loves controversy, and they like oversized personalities, but I don't think that's a new phenomenon. Ross Perot got a lot of attention 20 plus years ago. It certainly does drive audience. People will watch if Donald Trump is on the screen. He's a riveting personality in a lot of respects. And so, yes, the media is going to play to that, and why I certainly encourage people to consume a variety of media sources rather than just relying on the 24-hour cable news cycle, for example. But there's no question they like that, but I think you're going to see money go to media regardless, just because, like I said, it works. That's why you'll see a ton of commercials on TV, on radio, some as well, for various candidates in the primaries coming up in the general election, because it is a way to reach people, and it does work. That money's going to be there, I think, regardless. But yes, the media does like controversy. They do like drama, and we have that in abundance these days.
Yeah, I would, all of us try, and I think they try at the national level too. And it depends on what media there is, because it's so ill-defined right now, because Entertainment Tonight does some of the stuff too. And, you can argue if CNBC is which side of that, but certainly in my business, a strict line between advertising side and what we decide to cover. People know who these candidates are because of us, and you even know the bad stuff because of us. And as far as we always think it's the worst campaign there is and that the media is at fault. And I often remind people, take a walk through the Hall of Cartoons at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum, which showed the most horrible and outrageous things that were said in the midst of a presidential campaign through the media at that time. And we still ended up electing Abraham Lincoln, so something seemed to work.
With that, we will close. Please thank Jim and Bernie for being with us this morning. And we, next meeting will be Friday, December 18th. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir?